Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. I'm delighted to talk again to Dr. Abdullah Ali. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, Paul. Nice to be with you.
Great to have you back. For those that don't know, if any such people exist, Dr. Ali is Professor of Islamic Law and the Prophetic Tradition at Zaytuna College in California in the USA. Now, you've headlined your talk today, Reasoning with the Irrational, and you've highlighted three irrationalities. One is a theological irrationality, which we'll come to in a second. Another one is a political irrationality. And thirdly, a Muslim irrationality. So there's something here, I think, to offend everyone. So now coming first to the theological irrationality, which is to do with Christianity. And you wrote a fascinating article addressing certain Christian objections to Islam, which I thought was very good. And you posted it on social media, Twitter and whatnot. And I'll link to it in the description below. So do have a read. And we're going to be discussing that briefly before we go to the other two irrationalities. So the Christian asks, because you have a Christian question at the beginning of your article, the Christian asks the following: why can't God have a son? Muslims believe in the virgin birth. The Qur'an asks, how could God have a son when he has no consort, but allows for Mary to have a son even though she had no consort? Doesn't this give a power and privilege to Mary that God is denied? Seemingly interesting question. And then you punch back with your theological acumen. So what did you say in response to that question from the Christian?
Yeah. I would like, of course, I like to read from the rest of it, but prior to that, I just wanted to sort of provide some context. Of course, I'm not a biblical scholar, and I'm a scholar of Christianity, other religions, but of course, naturally, I've been exposed to the Bible like a lot of other people have. And this particular response originated from a question posed to a friend of, posed by a friend of mine. He actually sent me a video of a Christian man, or who is actually responding, sort of introducing this particular supposed difficulty to Muslims. It's this logical difficulty, and so my friend said to me, he said, "Well, how do you respond? What do you think about this logic?" Right. So I started to respond to him in private at first, and then I said, "You know what? I'm actually going to, provide this much more detailed and much more polished sort of response to this, so that I can actually, give some ammunition to the Muslim community as well." Right. And, so then I did like I said, I wrote what I wrote, I posted it on social media, then I posted it on my website. And then, that's what you have there, but of course, in response to this, of course, the first part of that is to say that the only way for God to have a son would be to redefine what a son the only way for God to have a son would be to redefine what a son is, in the same way some today attempt to redefine what a marriage and a woman are. A son is a male human child, just as a marriage can only happen between a male and a female, and as a woman is an adult female human. As long as a son is a human child and God is not human, God cannot have a son. And of course, that's really the first part of the response, right? And I think that quite often people, they think they're being very rational and logical when, they think they're comparing apples to apples when actually they're comparing apples to peaches or apples to watermelons, things like that. But just not understanding that, because fundamentally the argument is that, Muslims say that the only way that God can actually have a son is that God has to perform intercourse. And of course, it can only be possible with a female, and then that female gives birth, right? And he says, okay, well, but what about Mary? Mary, she didn't have a consort, and she gave birth as well. And so I say, well, how can this sort of sound like Mary has a power that God doesn't have? That's the ridiculousness of this is, I guess you say you can put on display, you can compare it to like saying, okay, well, since God can't urinate or defecate, God, so human beings have the power to urinate and defecate, and those are powers that human beings have that God doesn't have, right? And so that sort of makes human beings to be sort of like superior to God in some particular fashion. or like the saying, okay, etc. There are a lot of other directions this can go in.
Fairly absurd, or very absurd objections. It's not an animal. He doesn't behave like an animal. So that's not
right.
God. He's just not a creature. That's the definition of God.
Right, right, exactly. Right. So I'll continue. I'd say that. So the other alternative would be to redefine God, not in the sense of placing strictures on God, since we know more of what God is not than what God is. Among the things we know he is not is one, male or female. Calling God he doesn't imply gender. It is merely to employ the pronoun God attached to himself, since Semitic languages assign everything a linguistic gender, including things like pens, chairs, and cars. God is really an it who chose the male, not female, itness pronoun he to describe itself. So we say he. 2, God is not born, so he cannot be anyone's child. 3, God does not die, so God's existence cannot come to an end. 4, God's attributes do not grow or expand beyond what they already are, since that would undermine his permanence. Now what's interesting here is that what actually some of my answers were inspired by a very famous incident in the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is when the delegation from Najran had come to visit him in Medina, and they decided to debate with the Prophet about the sort of the Christology itself, so the divinity of Jesus, and whether or not he was a son, and so on. And in particular, they focus on the sonship or sonness or the fact of Jesus being the son. And the Prophet gave number of responses. Among those responses, according to the narrations, is that he said to them, have you ever seen a son which doesn't resemble his father? Right. That was part of the Prophet's response to him. Just like, well, and so even without getting into detail, one would say, well, that, okay, we'd have to redefine God in order to make it possible for God to have a son, right? Because again, you can't create a God, right? Gods, they don't emerge from non-existence. That gods are the God, which is only one God who created existence, created time, and created space. So it was, inspired. Some of my responses were inspired by that. And then I continue. I said, a son can only resemble his father or mother. And when we look at Jesus, upon him God's peace, we notice no true resemblance to God. He was born, he grew, he ate, he slept, he relieved himself, and according to Christians, he died. He was created and had no power to create himself, nor did he have any power to nor did he have any power to protect himself from harm. Sons resemble their parents, and Mary's, upon her God's peace, inability to miraculously impregnate herself matched Jesus's inability to enter her womb or to save himself from persecution and crucifixion. That is, the virgin birth was not due to some miraculous power God gave to Mary. Rather, it was from the sheer will of the Creator. So when one says that Muslims consider it possible for a woman to have a son without a consort, but impossible for God to have a son without a consort, this is a flawed analogy, since Mary is not equal to God. That logic, as a refutation of the Qur'an, would only be convincing if we equated Mary with God and imputed to her the same power and attributes. God, on the other hand, has power to do all things within the realm of possibility. And to have a son is not within the realm of possibility. So I'm commenting on this part here, so like we become accustomed to hearing statements like, okay, God can do anything, right? So that nothing's beyond God's power, right? And it is true, like there's nothing beyond God's power, but we have to add a sort of qualifier here, which is that nothing which is within the realm of possibility is beyond God's power. And I think that because our brains have been sort of framed or primed to believe in the idea that even the impossible is possible, right? That makes it, easy for people to embrace the idea that God can actually have a son. I do believe that that's part of the problem fundamentally, right? So it's like there's such thing as a square circle, or there's a cubical sphere, right? That it's, they're just things that are not within the realm of possibility.
Or my favorite is a married bachelor, for example.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You're very
Bachelor. I mean, these are just absurdities dreamt by the mind. They're not actually serious possibilities. But because of the trick of language, one can play these silly games.
Right.
Come up with these absurdities and say, you made a profound point. No, you haven't. You've just come up with a silly, absurd statement like God can't create a square circle or a married bachelor. It's an absurd question. It doesn't reflect on God. It reflects on the person who's saying that and the bizarre mentality they have.
Yeah. Pregnant man, a menstruating man, right? Things like that, So I continue here. So I read again. So God, on the other hand, has power to do all things within the realm of possibility. And to have a son is not within the realm of possibility. Sons resemble, succeed, and inherit from their fathers and mothers. And Jesus cannot succeed or inherit from God because God is the living, eternal, and self-subsisting. If Jesus is a God besides God, then there is not one God, but two. One uncreated that created the second. But God was not and cannot be created. He is the creator. So saying Jesus is God's son is akin to believing in the material existence of a square circle or triangle rectangle, which are things which only exist as expressions of language, not reality. The only other alternative would be to say the word son is being employed in a figurative sense as God's children. If so, this would reveal that there's nothing special about Jesus if all human beings are children of God. We could tolerate the metaphor, but not the literal connotations of sonness or childness. And so that's where I end that particular post.
Yeah, I think it's possible some Christians might disagree. I mean, because a lot of Christians have a heavily anthropomorphic understanding of God the Father. And we see this in Christian art, like in the Sistine Chapel, with the famous picture of God holding his arm out and this kind of electric current that goes into Adam and brings Adam to life. And God the Father there is clearly portrayed as an older man with a beard and so on. And these very humanoid, father-like depictions of God exist in churches, and I think they violate the commandments of God. Do not depict God in any form on earth. And this is completely prohibited in Judaism, as it is in Islam. But Christians appear to have forgotten that. So when Christians then ask, when you say a son can only resemble his father or mother, when we look at Jesus, we see no true resemblance to God. Your understanding of God, of course, is the Jewish/Christian one, the correct one, God without humanoid appearances and so on. But some Christians do have that. And so the question has a little bit of plausibility in their minds, but of course it is based on a forbidden image they have in their mind of God as a human being. I don't mean Jesus. I mean God the Father, as they call him, who's an older consort, an older man. So you have these two men, really. You have God the Father and Jesus in Christian art, often with the Trinity portrayed sometimes as a dove or a bird, the Holy Spirit, I mean.
But even if we were to say, God has a resemblance, and Jesus resembles God, his sort of supposed physical feature of God, right? That he does not resemble God in God's eternality and God's beginninglessness, God's uncreatedness, right? And so just by the virtue of that makes him not a God, and unlike God, right? I mean, when we talk about God, I mean, we don't think of God as just what if you look like a man, then you have godly characteristics. We don't think about God in those terms. We think about God as something which is infinite, something which is omnipotent, something which is omniscient, right? Which created everything else, the giver of life, the giver of death, the giver of salvation. That's what we think about when we think about God. So Jesus resembling God, if God as a man, doesn't give him any special status, because if Jesus is a man, then we are also men, and we also would resemble God, and so therefore we would be technically like him, sons of God, or resembling God in the same way that Jesus supposedly resembles God the most, right?
But it gets more complicated. I don't want to get sidetracked here, because we want to go on to the other two irrationalities. But the Christian concept of the imago Dei, the image of God, that human beings are made in the image of God, male and female, he made them. from Genesis. And there's this, what that phrase means. What does it mean to speak of human beings in the image of God? It is really a big debate about it in Christian theology back for nearly 2,000 years, and Augustine talked about it and so on. There are different views. Do you mean a physical image? Do you mean the qualities, the attributes? Do you mean this? Do you mean that? I don't want to get into that now because it's sidetracked us, but there is a bit of nuance there about what we mean by the image of God, because it has to be some resemblance if it's to be an image. Otherwise, the word image means nothing. But this is a particularly Christian debate, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's not, again, they're just trying to make some fundamental points, that I think are extremely important just for trying to find some type of common ground with people. Of course, theologically we differ, right? But okay, when you talk about, okay, well, what's the basis of your theology, right? You say, okay, the basis of my theology are my scripture, my books, right, compared to your books, and one can always ask, okay, well, how authentic are your books? Are your books, do they even make the claim of being the word of God, right? Or are they simply inspired by men? The Quranic claim is very clear. These are God's words, right? This was given to the prophet, and it was preserved, and it's not a book which consists of 24,000 manuscripts, which none of which are identical. I mean, the issue of like our theology is not really up for debate, right? As Muslims, and so again, it's, in other words, I guess what I'm trying to get at here when I talk about trying to, of course, do some rationality or sort of reason with the irrational is fundamentally sort of highlight just that how certain demands are placed upon us as human beings, and none of us are consistent. All of us can be hypocritical at times, but that the human being is not only a rational, creature, right? That we are also an animalistic creature, which means that, of course, we can, be influenced through our appetites and through our emotions, our thoughts, and all the things like that, right? And so not everyone, we can't appeal to everyone through logos, that most people, you appeal through them through pathos, right? Or through ethos, right? And I think that pathos and ethos play probably a larger role in persuasion.
I was just saying, especially politicians are very good at playing on our emotions and our passions and our instincts rather than our reason. And that is actually your second irrationality, which is political irrationality. And you shared with me earlier an article. I won't take your thunder on this, but which really quite shocked me, actually. So what is this political irrationality that you're concerned about?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is Muslims have, we become more and more involved in politics in the West, right, over the past couple of decades. And I grew up in the time when politics wasn't really that important for Muslims. If anything, most Muslims I knew actually felt that, okay, it was haram for you to be involved in politics in a particular fashion, to vote for anyone, to participate as a candidate, those type of things. And then all of a sudden something happened, and then 9/11 happened. And then Muslims started to talk about the importance of being at the table, even to the extent that some people would say things like, okay, well, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So to make it sound as if like it's your compulsory, your obligation to be involved politically or to vote. I've only voted myself twice in my life, and many people who've observed me over the past perhaps 6-7 years in my posts on internet, I probably noticed that a lot of posts which have been sort of, favorable towards the conservatives, a lot of conservative posts. And I've always told people when people question me about that, I say, well, listen, the only reason I post these things is because I have an interest in sharing the full picture with people, right? We shouldn't be only wedded to one particular side of a story. Yeah. And our community, heavily are leftists, right? Have been sort of pro-Democrat, leftists especially after Trump, came into office, right? More and more, and so for instance, I even used to share videos by Ben Shapiro, right? And so when people ask me, I say, well, I'm not sharing Ben Shapiro's views about the Zionist state. But I'm sharing Ben Shapiro because I haven't found anyone other than Ben Shapiro speaking about this issue or that issue, right? In the way that he does, right? So I would tell people, I say, well, give me someone who has less baggage, right? Who I can share, right? because I at the time I said, well, I don't have the time to try to record my own message, right? You know, I was too busy. You know, it wasn't something I was into. Alhamdulillah, I've gotten better at this internet thing with, you know, the cameras and so on. You know, but I really wasn't, right?
You've got this amazing new program. Haven't you? You're interviewing leading scholars now, and that's fantastic development.
Yeah, I've become more comfortable with it. You know, I mean, you probably, if you go back to some of the earlier interviews, I mean, some of the interviews I posted, they actually were more recent, you know, but some of them they're early. You know, you probably see a different comfort level, you know. But again, it's taking some time to even just adjust to that. But again, the fundamental point was just that, okay, you know, I want people, Muslims, to see, to actually hear what people are saying, rather than just simply get a sort of a distilled version of what the right, for instance, had to say about things. You know, it wasn't so much of me being committed to the Republican Party or committed to Trump so much, of those type of things. It's just that, okay, well, I want my community to be well informed, right? To have everything that they need to make the right decision, and hopefully that they'll, again, logos, right? It'll, you know, it's like, but unfortunately, like I said, it's like over years, it's like, well, no, it's pathos and his ethos. Right. So people say, no, you're not allowed to share something by that person because I don't like one opinion that person has. Right.
And just to find out, logos, correct me if I'm wrong, logos is a Greek word, of course. It's where we get the word ology from, the end of our words. It says the ology bit at the end comes from logos, meaning like the study of, I guess, in modern language. But it means word. It also means rationality, reason. And so it's a Greek word coming from Greek philosophy originally. But so that's that kind of thing. And then you got pathos, by which I understand you mean the nafs, basically, the passion,
right. So the emotional appeal and things like that.
And then ethos, I presume you mean race or ethnicity?
No, not so much. No, ethos are more so like in other words, your moral sentiments.
Ethos. Sorry, I thought you said ethnos. I misheard you. Sorry.
No, ethos. I'm sorry.
Ethos. Yeah, of course.
You guys say it in Britain. How do you say ethos? What do you say?
How do we say it? Ethos? How do you say it in California?
Well, ethos. That's why I said ethos. You know, in other words, and I'm talking about sort of ethical appeals. You know, so you find common ground with people. You know, you have really believe the same thing. You have, I don't know if you both, everybody's a Marxist, everyone's a capitalist. Whatever ideology you adhere to, you're all Sufis, you're all Salafis. You know, so it's that appeals to you. You know, and you don't really care if it's irrational or irrational. Just that, okay, this is what we all sort of embrace and we believe in, you know. So in other words, of course, that's sort of like just a long, you know, sort of way to work up to this commentary about what I talk about in the political realm about the irrationality there, right? And this is something that I've noticed earlier on too, and I've actually written about it. In 2020, I wrote a piece called "A New Political Vision for Muslim America," and in that particular piece, I was very critical of the conservatives, and I made the point to say that that there's certain, you know, important and valuable things on the right. However, you know, they become completely irrational once the subject of the Palestinians and the Israelis becomes completely irrational, right?
I remember Jordan Peterson was the flavor of the month amongst many people, on Muslims, I mean, amongst others, on Twitter and YouTube and so on. And then of course, the events in October last year happened. And, you know, here is he cheering on genocide, basically. And suddenly overnight, he became persona non grata, and everyone hated him and stopped quoting him as an interesting possible Muslim. Maybe he'll convert, or doesn't he have an interesting perspective on the family or on trans or gender or pronouns or whatever. But now he's completely unaccepted, understandably. I mean, he said some terrible things, actually cheerleading genocide and the killing of innocent Palestinian men and women, children. So rightly, people completely dropped him. But then someone else, another similar figure you share with me, has done something almost identical.
Professor Truman, you know, who's the author of the Rise and Triumph of the Modern.
The Rise and Triumph of the Modern. So this is actually the book which was the flavor of the month amongst Muslims, and he appeared at Zaytuna in debate with your president. And your journal, the House Journal of Zaytuna College, as an esteemed dialogue partner, conservative Christian. We are Muslims. We can talk here. Shared concerns, shared anxieties about our contemporary culture. And then suddenly, boom, out of nowhere, something happens. What happened?
Yeah, well, what happened was the October 7th, right? And October 7th, of course, has really exposed so many different people. I mean, but see, for me, it's not surprising, right? And this one of the points I'm trying to make is that that it's not surprising to me to see this because I've already seen it before. I've seen the pattern, so it's a bit predictable for me. The thing that often concerns me is that Muslims that they become, too surprised at these type of takes from people. Now people on the right, Muslims in the West generally have a negative viewpoint view of to begin with, right? And I think most Muslims are probably unfamiliar with Truman, right? But in his article, it's an article, I mean, what the pro-Palestinian campus protests are really about. He makes some valid points in the article, right? And he, like, for instance, when he talked about how you have all of these this leftists who are, supposedly, on the side of Muslims and, the gays, LGBTQ, et cetera, drag queens and all these people who are supporting the Palestinian cause itself, or supporting the protest, rather, he would say. But it seemed like he boils it down to like just this idea that, okay, well, everybody is out there. Why are they supported? Because they hate Jews, they hate America, right?
And that's what he actually, this article, by the way, is in a very prestigious journal called First Things. Yeah. I mean, when I was a Christian, I used to read this religiously. It's a fantastic journal full of, some of the leading intellectualites in the Christian church in the United States, Britain, and elsewhere. It's a very heavyweight journal, actually, and it's a very serious academic work. And this guy, Carl Trueman, is actually British, I'm embarrassed to say. Although if you see him on YouTube now, he's developed a slight American accent, which I guess is so he can fit in with the natives a bit. He is, sorry to call you the Americans, I mean. And he is, let me just say who he is, Professor of Biblical and Religious Studies at Grove City College, University of Aberdeen, by the way, in the UK. And he's written this amazing book, as we've shown. And this article has just been published. And when I read it, I mean, I'll just give it a few choice quotes. So the nature of these pro-Palestinian protests that he thinks are terrible. It reveals something very disturbing, he claims. It is clear that they were not motivated. These are people who are protesting against genocide. It is clear that they are not motivated, he says, by legitimate concern for Arab and Muslim lives, whatever the rhetoric. If they were, he says, then Israel would hardly be the only or even primary target. The death toll from over a decade of government-led bloodshed in Syria is catastrophic, but has not gripped the imagination of campus activists. The slaughter there continues to this day in Syria, though one could be forgiven for not knowing this given the lack of media and student interest in the conflict. Rather, the campus protests are motivated by hatred of Jews. Whoa. I mean, this is outrageous. I mean, I went on one demonstration in London. You have families, men, the family people with their children who were just very upset and concerned, rightly, with the genocide going on. There was no hatred for Jews. This is just a slur and a lie against ordinary people who are passionately concerned about their fellow human beings. Not everyone's a Muslim is concerned. A lot of non-Muslims are concerned. And then it struck me about this Syria thing. Well, why were there no protests on the streets about Syria? Well, because our governments, the American government, the British government, were very anti-Syria as well. Who were we protesting against? We didn't have to protest against the media or the government because they too were anti-Assad. They too were calling for his downfall. Everyone agreed. So we didn't need to go on the streets and protest against the Bush administration or the Biden administration or Blair or whatever, because at that time, everyone agreed with what was going on was wrong. So why protest? We were just very upset about it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the thing is, like, that's interesting about what he says is that it actually does apply to some people. There are a lot of people who are involved in these protests who really do hate America, and they hate, they're not really that interested in the Palestinian cause. There are people there, right? And some of them are provocateurs, as you know, right? So you do have those people in the midst of the protest, However, for him to make it seem as if like the overriding issue, right, is not front and center in the minds of the vast majority of those protesters, itself is disingenuous. It's really, it's not a good look for someone who, who's supposedly one, an academic, and then two, a good representative of one's religion, right? Because, when you have to, if you have to lie, right, if your religion allows for you to lie, right, or to misrepresent or to distort the truth, that in itself doesn't, it doesn't place your religion on a good footing, or it doesn't. I guess it makes it perhaps less appealing to many people, if that's what it really means. Because it's like, well, it sends a message that, okay, well, if I'm a liar prior to my conversion, then I can continue to do so. Then I mean, why convert to begin with, right? It's, of course, I'm rambling a little bit there, but like his allusion to Syria really is somewhat like a common refrain among conservatives anyway, because, like, for instance, you can substitute the Syria example with BLM, because they'll say the same thing. I say, well, okay, if you care so much about Black lives, then why are Black people not so? Why are they outraged at the high level of death and murder happening in Black neighborhoods? I mean, if we're so concerned about Black lives, and why is no one talking about people being killed in Sudan right now, right? So and there's some truth to it, right? So it's almost like, okay, well, I'm going to expose your hypocrisy, and because you're a hypocrite on these other issues, you can't be sincere when it comes to this one issue over here, right? And I do think that definitely applies to some people, but it doesn't, or rather it obscures the main problem, which is that there's tyranny against the Palestinians happening in Israel, on the part of the Zionists, et cetera. And, and this has been going on for a very long time, right? So again, it's so saying, okay, let's trying to reason with the irrational is not so much to say, okay, well, they actually are attempting to reason with them. Although I do still have hope that, some people will sort of, realize their mistakes in this particular regard. But it's almost like saying, you really can't reason with them, because people are just driven by, or rather they're much more overwhelmed by emotion, by, trying to sort of cheer for the team when things really just get that rough and get that difficult, right, for everyone, and so it sort of seems like to me that he's sort of just being a cheerleader, right, for his own religion, and apparently he's a Zionist Christian, and at least that's the impression one can get from reading this. And maybe he's not, maybe he'll disassociate himself, but I'm hoping that that eventually someone will deliver such a message to him and others like him. So
I just, is very concerning, because he is a guy that we look to, and then suddenly he turns out to be. There's another bit. I'm not going to read any more of his article, but I just mentioned in the penultimate paragraph, he attributes these protests as manifestations of Satan himself. He uses flowery religious Mephistophelian language, but he is. So basically, we are motivated by pure evil in support of the Palestinians, and to use that kind of religious language to literally demonize people who are fighting injustice is shocking. And I think we talk about irrationality. I'm not sure how it's possible to have dialogue, rational discussion, where the paradigms, the metaphysical paradigms, are so different from each other, us and them. I'm not sure there's even a way to employ logos, as you put it, in that regard. I'm optimistic, to be honest.
It's I think that there are multiple issues as well. I mean, it's not only just a question of whether or not you can rationalize with people. I think that most people have certain pressures on them, right? Everyone has, I guess you'd say, a limit that one will go to. You have sort of red lines, I guess you would say, that you can't cross because of certain pressures above you, right? Certain risks are involved. And quite often, I think that this is really what drives so many people like him in particular. And again, I don't know him that well to know that, he just doesn't generally feel that way. Maybe he does, right? But when you think of politicians clearly, like, for instance, we have this problem with AIPAC, like in the US, and they have like such a stranglehold on U.S. politicians, right? And just seeing this, and especially those who are so publicly Christian among them, like the head of the House right now, the House of Representatives.
He's very openly Christian, and referring to the Bible in his support for Israel. It's so that this is turning into a holy, I use the term ironically, holy war for these Christians. And they're not just hillbillies in the back. These are at the heart of power in Washington. And this theological or holy war dimension is really ignored in the British press. It's all just about Hamas. Well, actually, there's a lot more going on here, actually, for some people.
Yeah. And so it definitely does seem that way. And I think that the common person, who is not involved in politics probably would take things to heart that way. Those who are like in the church, who actually evangelicals, who are like, okay, well, yeah, we really believe this stuff. Yeah. And they hear someone like Mike Johnson saying something along those lines. And does he really believe it, or has he been threatened? Is he afraid? I mean, I don't know. What does it involve? What's happening? And you see so many U.S. politicians just cave in, right? Yeah. And it's like, okay, they become, like I said, completely irrational with Israel. When Israel comes up, they keep telling us things like, they're our best friend and our strongest ally in that part of the world. And Kim Iverson, I saw a post from her earlier today. She made a point. She was actually responding to Senator Lindsey Graham, who was making these sort of claims about Israel. And she makes a point that, how many of our wars have they actually participated in? In other words, how many times have they actually sent soldiers to our wars to participate? It doesn't seem like that's what an ally would do.
They have, it's great allies. It never helped you at all.
Yeah.
So the last, let's move on to the last one, and perhaps most controversial in some ways. Yeah. And I'll leave this to you. So Muslim irrationality. So what is this? What are these irrationalities that you have in mind with Muslims?
Yeah. Again, it's fundamentally when I'm talking about irrationalities, I'm saying, conditions which make it difficult to have a conversation with someone, to actually try to find common ground with them, right? And when passions are high, it's extremely difficult today, almost impossible with certain people, right? Yeah. And let me start with a few examples, right? Yeah. After the October 7th, I gave a khutbah in one of the messages here in California. And in the midst of my khutbah, and I was speaking about the Palestinians, and I was very supportive, at least I felt I was. But I also was a little critical of Muslims, generally speaking, during that khutbah. And I even cried during that khutbah, right? Because I never cry in my khutbahs, right? I was just so touched by what was happening. But there was a sister who was in attendance, and she just started to scream, like, really? Free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. She's in the middle of the khutbah, right?
Now, Islamically, it's not permitted. You're not supposed to make any outbursts, unless, of course, there's a fire or something. You have to say something. But you're not supposed to make comments about the person living the khutbah at all. That's actually prohibited or disliked.
Yeah, exactly. It is. It's prohibited. You're not supposed to talk. You're supposed to just be listening, right, to the imam speak. Right. And it was worrisome at the moment for a moment, because I was like, okay, well, so now there's no more sacred ground. There are no more sanctities involved, right? That this issue has, blown up such to the extent that even basic Muslim etiquette, devotional etiquette, can now be violated, at least in the minds of certain Muslims. And alhamdulillah, I mean, the sisters who were there in the attendance, they calmed her down. They made her stop. They told her to stop, so she stopped the show. So she screamed it out a few different times, right? And of course, I understand the outburst of emotion and why. I don't know if she had family members who were killed and things like that. I don't know.
Possible.
Right. So, but it's just that, but people need to understand this. So that's like one incident, right? Some months later, I came to the masjid. I gave another khutbah. Now this time, I didn't speak about anything political. I just kept it, religious, and I felt like this is an opportunity to give Muslims a lesson in Islam, something that'll strengthen their faith, and they can walk out, feeling that that they received some guidance today. And at the end of the khutbah, I made a short dua for the Palestinians. Right after it was all over, a brother comes up to me and says, and it's one individual, I've never seen him in the masjid before, and I think perhaps it was his first time there. And so he came up to me and he said, brother, you're not in Saudi Arabia. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm not in Saudi Arabia? So he says, well, you can talk about whatever you want here. Nobody's going to come and get you. I said, what do you mean? Why are you saying that? He said, listen, all of us, I'm quite sure that most of the people in the masjid are upset today. I said, well, what do you mean they're upset? Why would they be upset? He said, because we came here looking forward to hearing something about Philistine, right? And then you talked about this other thing, right? We've been waiting all week to hear a message about Philistine.
Right.
And I said to him, well, first, I disagree with you. I don't think that most of the people in the masjid here are upset. As a matter of fact, I don't feel that anybody's upset other than you, right? And anyway, long story short, he was upset, right, that I didn't talk about what he expected for me to talk about. And I had to tell him in the end that, that basically, okay, there are a lot of issues I could have spoken about, and there are a lot of people who I could have prayed for, but I actually did pray for the Palestinians at the end of the khutbah. And then he says to me, he said, well, but it wasn't long. It wasn't long. But I made a prayer. Why did
you get this khutbah? You or him? I mean,
right. Yeah. That was one of the things that I talk about. You could have gone somewhere else. I mean, if you don't like what I talk about, you could have attended someone else's. But it's like, okay, I said, I didn't pray for the Uyghurs. I didn't pray for the Rohingya. I didn't pray for people in Somalia. I didn't pray for people in Sudan. And I said, as I listed these things, he said to me, are you equating what's happening to the Palestinians to what's happening to them? And I told him, I said, yes, I am. Yes, I am. Right. The Palestinians are not the only people on the planet suffering. And again, I'm sorry I even had to say that, but again, there's I felt like, okay, this is someone who's being highly irrational, right, among Muslims. And then a third story I wanted to bring up before I even talk about some other issues that related to, the points that I sent to you this morning, that like I'd give the Eid khutbah. And during the Eid khutbah, once again, I feel like this is a time, of gratitude. And it's not a time for lecturing people about things. That's the way I treat the Eid khutbahs, because it's a happy day. We just finished the fast of Ramadan. I wanted to encourage people, to remember Allah, but also, be feel good about yourself, et cetera, et cetera. And so at the end of that, the very first person, a brother comes to me. I don't even think he said Assalamu alaikum or anything. He came straight to me and says, so, brother, people in Gaza are dying, and you didn't talk about Gaza. And I would say, well, I said, we think about the people in Gaza every single day, right? We think about them, we pray for them every single day, and we'll continue to do so, right? I'm sorry you feel that way, but it was this really, again, I understand the passion, I get it, I get the passion, right? But if you can't expect everyone to share the same degree of passion and to actually conform to everything that you want them to conform to, so in other words, so to break out to other things that I'm thinking about is that, for instance, quite often you may see me on social media, I talk about just like cynicism and how cynical I am about democracy. I'm cynical about politics in general. I'm cynical about the media, etc. Right. And so I'm constantly trying to send out messages to the Muslims, right? Hoping that those messages will help to, I guess you would say, keep everyone sane, right? In other words, lower expectations, right? You continue to work hard, you can, have hope to be successful in our missions. But at the same time, we should always expect that we may not achieve our goals, right? And the worst thing I think that can happen is that someone falls into depression because they feel that God didn't answer their prayers, right? Mm-hmm. Right. I've been praying. We're on the right. We're people of the truth. Our mission, our particular, efforts are related to the truth and justice, and we've been praying, and then we didn't get what we wanted, but that's just not the way that God works, and I just try to remind people of those type of things, so like many Muslims, if you seem to have the impression that the only time that the media, for instance, that the media is biased is when it's something related to Muslims, right? And I do think that we have to change our perspective on that and understand that the media bias is universal, that the media is constantly sort of dishing out propaganda to the public, right, about every single issue that's out there, right? But the fact that a Muslim may think that the only time that now CNN is being biased, right, to me itself says that we ourselves are out of touch with the larger machinations of very powerful people, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So that's just one example. Like, so it's I think there's been a cynic about that, So a lot of Muslims got upset when, for instance, Craig Constantine, he came out in support as well of the Israelis, right? And it was critical of the Palestinian protests, right? Yeah.
He got a lot of blowback from prominent Muslim academics in the States and elsewhere on social media.
Yeah. But for me, I never really expected much from someone like him. Right? You understand? So I just think that we have to sort of, our expectations are too high.
Yeah, I guess you're right. We're Jordan Peterson and other. This is what you're saying here is that we're constantly surprised by when these people who seem friendly and maybe has nice things to say about Muslims, although they're not Muslims, then come out with some truly awful things. They are persona non grata again, and we're just shocked that they are actually not really pro-Muslim or whatever at all. He's been this guy Craig Constantine. He's been off people's radar for a while now because he's pro this sect which likes. I won't go into the details, but this sect that calls themselves Muslim that are not seen as Muslims by Sunni Muslims, and he's kind of in bed with them a lot, and this kind of discredited him in his credibility in the eyes of Sunni Muslims and others. But then this pro-Israeli, anti-Palestine rhetoric just made it a hell of a lot worse.
Right. I mean, we get too like just happy when we find like non-Muslims saying positive things about Islam. And it's good. Alhamdulillah, we hear them saying positive things about the Prophet or about Islam in general. I think that's it's alhamdulillah. We want people to say good things. I'm not saying that we shouldn't want them to say good things about Islam, but if they're still not Muslim, right, at the end of the day, you have to say to yourself, okay, well,
what's going on here? Hang on, why aren't they Muslim?
right. Which is going to mean that, okay, well, eventually something's going to be said that's going to offend all of us, right? And then we're going to just be floored by it. We're going to be outraged by it, like we did, like with Jordan Peterson. Like for me, like I said, I've been sharing. I think I was one of the first Muslims on social media who begun to share things by Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I can believe that.
So right. So, but I never I never felt okay that Jordan Peterson. He saw eye to eye with me theologically or anything like that. It was just like he built up like a niche. He found a niche, right? And a lot of people are attracted to him because of that niche. Right?
The pronouns, LGBT, trans,
exactly.
Anti-woke a bit, but
he was leading the charge in those areas when Muslims were not. He was talking about things that Muslims, there were almost no Muslims talking about those things, right? If anything, like I said, Muslims were like in bed with the left. Muslims were like at the time, up until recently with the sort of navigating differences document, Muslims are like, hey, well, we're friends of the left, right?
But not anymore. This is a historical perspective, of course. The good news is it's no longer true, mostly.
So otherwise, it's that's an aspect of it. Another aspect of it is, I would say, is that it seems that Muslims become a bit too intolerant with one another, right? We're too intolerant with one another, and it seems that we have the tendency to believe that our opinions, right, one, are sort of the result of some type of divine inspiration, right? Every single person with their opinion, believes that, of course, that Allah is speaking through me, and then two, that if I disagree with you, then it seemed that that's actually like me. It's a personal attack. It's not a personal attack. Right? I'll give you an example of this. And again, I don't know much about his thought, right? But Imran Hussein, right? For instance, Imran Hussein, he has this opinion about the Bosnia, genocide, right? So he says he doesn't consider it to be a genocide. I don't know why he doesn't consider it to be a genocide, right? I don't know if he's talking about a technical definition of genocide or anything like that. But I've seen people on Twitter attack him. People I know, friends of mine, attack him, and then they say, okay, well, he denies genocide of the Bosnians, therefore he's trash, he's zero, right? And then I saw like follow up like a picture of him with this guy Jackson Hinkle together, and then someone claimed, okay, this is proof that they're working for the Zionists. And I'm just like, well, I'm just like, okay, why we have to go that far? Why we have to sort of play guilt by association? Why does it have to be that someone's working for the Zionists simply because they don't take my opinion, right, about something? And so, I mean, why obsess about whether or not I want to call something a genocide, right? Yeah, I mean, a person may, okay, it's a massacre, right? It's terrible, right? It's mass murder, right? But a person may say, I'm not going to call it genocide because genocide has a specific definitions, and according to the universal, the International Court of Justice or something like that. I don't know, right? So that's just one example, one of many examples, something like that. Or like I saw like Dr. Shadi Masri, who, he made a statement about Bitcoin and some of the Bitcoin brothers, they lost it. They was like, well, this is proof that you can study a little bit of Islam, but you really don't know everything. And I'm just like, okay, all right, okay, Dr. Shadi made a mistake, right? Okay, he didn't have all the information available to him. Why does it have to turn into like a personal attack now? We start to attack the person.
Say I've never commented or said anything about Bitcoin in my life, and I hopefully never will, because I know nothing about it. Secondly, I really couldn't care less. I'm sorry, folks, but I just couldn't care less. Right. And thirdly, there'd be retribution to hell to pay if I did. So for those two reasons, I'm not going to be commenting on it ever, hopefully.
Right. Yeah. I know. And I think, of course, as a rule, like we shouldn't comment on things that we don't fully understand. I mean, I think all of us should do that. But I'm just talking about just sort of the reaction, and I guess sort of to make the fundamental point, I guess I think I want to make is that we can be factually correct, but most people don't seem to really care so much about us being factually correct. They care more about how we make them feel, like special, or that we making them feel that they're cared for, and that, in other words, like for instance, we're coming back to Christianity. There are so many Christianity is still one of the largest religions on the planet, if not still the largest religion on the planet at the moment. For the moment, right? And as a Muslim, right, of course, it may change, right? But I mean, how many people are committed Christians, right? How many of them are really committed Christians, or how many of them truly understand what the Bible says, the theology, those type of things? Of course, we can say that similar things about Muslims, but I do think that probably can find more committed Muslims than you can find committed Christians. Yes. But fundamentally, the question of like, well, what is it that attracts so many people to them, despite the fact that, their book itself, again, there's so many problems, as Muslims, they can point out so many problems with the Bible itself. And in other words, so they're resting upon like very flimsy epistemological foundations, right? With regard to the authenticity of their very, religious record, right? And the Muslims, we don't really have that problem, right? But Christians do have that problem. But still, more people are very, very much attracted to Christianity. And I personally think it has something to do with the fact that they're very good at selling the idea that I care about you, that I care about you, and I really am interested in your salvation. And I just think that Muslims, have to be very careful, right, about this idea of just, I have to be correct. I'm right. You're wrong. It's time. I have to refute this. I have to debate, right, with this person and that person. And while, of course, the individual you're debating with actually may deserve certain amount of harshness, right, because of disrespect, etc. But an observer may say, you know what, I don't want to go anywhere near that particular person because that person is a bit too judgmental, right? Yeah, so
this is a very good point. And as I've often said, one can win the argument, and this is really advice to myself or criticism myself for my own record, that one can win the argument but lose the person.
Yes,
particularly like Christianity, where one may know certain things, it is easy to cut through that, and then the person, their ego gets affected, and you don't end up becoming friends with this person. Certainly not caring for that person. You're certainly not caring for their salvation, their eternal soul, that they should embrace Islam. Not really, because you're having a boxing match with them or something. Right. And this is a temptation, this kind of egotism. Maybe it's a male thing as well. I don't see many sisters doing this, to be honest. But it's not. I mean, it has its place, perhaps. Maybe it's Speaker's Corner. But for one, it's not dawah, because that's not what dawah is about. And secondly, I'm not sure it's very efficacious. Does it really win souls? Does it make you friends? And there's something like, not just yourself, Hamza Zortz's, whose marvelous approach to dawah now. He's really very, very good on this subject about how to relate to people, to win people over, to befriend them, to be sincere, to actually care for them. Exactly what you've been saying, actually. He's very, very good now, Hamza Zortz's, on this subject, and hugely positive influence on the scene. So, yeah, there is hope that we can move away from this polemical. Again, there is a place for debate, don't get me wrong, but it's not, you don't demonstrate your care for someone by arguing with them.
Right, exactly, and that's fundamentally, I guess you'd say, the upshot of everything I'm talking about here is just, okay, the reasoning with the irrational. So how do you reach the irrational? Is there a way for you to reach the irrational? Right. I mean, some of these people, like I said, like the bigger names we talked about at the beginning, probably will be more difficult to persuade those type of people because of their status and also the pressures that they may have on them from certain sectors of the world, of the country, right? But for the masses, it's like, for the sake of the masses, it's like, okay, well, I mean, we can get bogged down into all the academic stuff, right? But at the end of the day, there are people with real needs. And again, that's not to say, okay, well, we shouldn't be concerned with academic stuff, because I mean, I teach at a college, liberal arts college, so it is good and important to have like a larger vision and how everything else works underneath that universal, that sort of that vision that you have, the skeleton that you have in mind, but I think Muslims are described, or believers in the Qur'an are described as being compassionate to one another, right? But stern against the enemies of faith, right? That's the way we're described as being, right? But I just like, especially on Twitter, or we call X, I just think that, there's not a lot of benefit of doubt given to people. There's not a lot of, people, they're very unforgiving when people make mistakes.
Yeah. This is a big thing, but we're not very good at being forgiving.
Yeah.
I mean, I made mistakes. I've received much forgiveness and positive grace from people. Again, Hamza's also comes to mind. And this is really very, very positive, and very to manifest God's grace like that is really very, very necessary. And unfortunately, many of us don't do this very well.
Yeah. I mean, because the ultimate enemy, the real enemy of all humanity, is Satan. Right?
Yeah.
Right. And the way I try to approach things is that, okay, every human being is redeemable, right? If the enemy is Satan and my fellow man is not my enemy, my natural enemy, then every man, every woman is redeemable, right? Mm-hmm. And this is, again, it was also what makes it possible for me to listening to people who I know don't like Islam, right? And to actually share like their viewpoints, like publicly. It's like, well, here, so-and-so said this. And so I always would tell people, it's like, well, I'm sharing this person. Why? Because they're saying something unique that no Muslim I know, no person without the baggage and anything is saying. So, okay, well, the person is very articulate. So here, take it or leave it. I mean, try not to focus on the messenger, but hear the message itself.
You mentioned Ben Shapiro earlier on being someone who shared for that reason. And I know you got criticism for doing that. I think at one point I shared him and I got an avalanche of abuse. So I thought, okay, maybe no longer.
Yeah, no, I mean, I haven't shared him in some years now, but again, it was when he first started to become famous, right? Yeah. And so he was debating with some of these younger kids about abortion and about transgenderism, So okay, that's what made him famous. Right? That's what made him famous. And so I shared those things at a time when Muslims were actually trying to accommodate transgenderism. They were trying to argue for the validity of abortion. And I was like, well, what are you talking about, right? And so someone would say, okay, well, no, I'm not going to accept it from Ben Shapiro because he's a Zionist. Okay, I understand that.
You got to weigh it up, because if he is an outspoken Zionist and is doing more harm than good, then maybe it's not wise to share. Do you know what I mean?
But at that time, no. Now, yes, it would. If you did it today, sure, it would be more harm than good, right? But again, it was my same attitude. Was my same attitude with Jordan Peterson. That people were claiming that he was some racist and all this. And I would say, well, okay. I mean, Jordan Peterson. Actually, I got blocked by Jordan Peterson after October 7th because I was on his page and I was very critical of him because when he did the post about give him hell, and then he did a follow-up. He posted a video. I forgot exactly what the title of it was, but it was something along the lines about how he wasn't speaking to all Muslims. He was speaking to the Muslim thugs, and so I did a long post and I told him you probably should take a break from the social media. You're just making it worse for yourself. You would never make a video called, you're not talking to all the Jews. You're just talking about the Jewish thugs, right? And then actually I know I got blocked, so I know he saw my post.
Yeah. I didn't. Yeah. Gosh.
Right. So, and that's another thing too. Like, so even like the way that I approach the issue of like what's happening with the Palestinians, and I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but basically, I've had people being critical of me because they'll see me being critical of Muslims and the movement, right, itself, right? So I'll be critical. I'm critical of the movement, because I want Muslims to be the best that they can be, right? But then it seems like people only notice, those type of posts because they're critical, But if you go through my feed, and I always tell people, okay, well, you act as if like I've not been supportive of the Palestinians, right? If anything, especially during the first month or so, a lot of my posts were being shared, right? Because I was so supportive of the Palestinians, right? Right. But all throughout this period, I've been very supportive of the Palestinians, But people act as if, okay, you're not allowed to be critical of Hamas or critical of the protests or critical of the way that you're going about trying to advocate for the Palestinians. I'm going to say, what I need to say as your brother, right? And so that hopefully we can course correct and we can, have the greatest impact, so hopefully that the Palestinians can get the type of support that they're looking for. So anyway, so at the end of the day, that's in a nutshell what I was referring to when I said reasoning with the irrational, and there are different levels of it. And, but I do still think that we can find common ground with even the conservatives who have a negative view of the protests. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to work with, I think that there's a difference between saying, okay, well, we have to work with them as opposed to we can work with them. But if you expect, or rather, let's put it another way, if a person knows about Islam and is not Muslim, we have to accept that, or entertain the possibility that they have some negative opinions about Islam and about Muslims, right?
I think there's also an element. It's just I know at your college, there's a tuner and others. You Sheikh Hamza Yusuf reached out to Jordan Peterson, and then the college reached out to this guy Carl Truman and so on. And there's an awful lot of goodwill from your side, and you honestly try to form, intelligent alliances with like-minded people, and then these very people turn on you. And they in supporting the most appalling causes and so on. And I mean, can one reasonably have expected you could expect that? You would know that would happen? I don't know, actually. So in a sense, you have been
right. You can't know.
Crafted, actually, and I think there's a bit of injustice that's been done to you, actually, rather than just. Well, we shouldn't have been so naive as to think that these individuals could have been decent people. Well, you gave it a good try, and these people it betrayed your trust in a way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, important point, very important point. And again, so our reaction to the people like Constantine and others is like, well, okay,
you goodwill, Bill Bridges, and then they turn on you and say, we're going to support people who are killing your brothers and sisters in the tens of thousands. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, maybe in hindsight, I don't know, but
So, you're hopeful, but you can't control it. So.
No. Right. Okay, well, that's really interesting. I hope we haven't, as I said at the beginning, there's something in this video to offend everyone here. But we put a link to your article we discussed at the beginning, where Christian, why can't God have a son? So you can read that and ponder on your words, which is a very well written piece. I do recommend it. And also I'll put a link to your Twitter feed where you can see exactly what you've been saying all this time. Bin Hamid Ali, link to your Twitter handle or your X handle, whatever it's called these days, in the description below. And thank you very much indeed for your time. Your contribution to the debate, these debates, is necessary in my opinion and welcome, and we should be more forgiving to each other, as you say, without giving up our principles, of course. But I think you are a necessary irritant, if I can be rude about it, a necessary irritant in the world, just to keep us sane, hopefully, in the midst of the insanity of the world we live in. So thank you for your contribution. And
thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
Till next time. Take care. Salam.